Hello, this is Ryan Hoff, and today we have with us Anton Neff, Owen County Councilman and AIC past president. AIC is sharing a webinar that Purdue, the LTAP program there, has put together explaining the changes to the Community Crossings program that was part of this year's legislation. A big part of that discussion centers around the requirement to have adopted a wheel tax and surtax to be eligible for a major new lane miles distribution. This is very important for counties because up to 79% of this new fund could be available for counties, which is far above the historic trend for what counties have received from the existing Community Crossings grant program. But there are still about 1/3 of Indiana's counties who have not adopted a wheel tax. So we wanted to have a discussion with Anton to get some perspective around the adoption of a wheel tax for those counties who will be considering it as part of this new legislation and new funding opportunity. So good morning, Anton. How are you?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me with you for this particular conversation.
Of course.
Yeah.
So Anton, when did you first adopt the wheel tax in Owen County?
It was a little before my time in county government. It was adopted in 1997, and it was to be effective January 1st of 1998. There was a minor adjustment the following year, and then it had stayed that way until we revisited updating that and changing the rates in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at that time, what was the discussion around the funding need for your county?
Well, I actually remember the original discussion. I was in college at the time. Our local newspaper had quite a bit of coverage about, at that time, a county that didn't have a wheel tax that was considering having one. And it was very contentious, as you can imagine. That's always a hot topic when you're looking at raising any kind of taxes. And I know that it was a split vote, but it was adopted and had stayed in place for many years. I remember signage that was on certain roadways saying this road was paved with wheel tax dollars. And that kind of gave the public some closure, I guess, if you will, or a follow-up to raising that money and then using it for the purpose it was intended for. But as you know, road funding had lagged behind for years, and the legislature had done an overhaul. Yeah. And there was a lot of discussion about the condition of roads and a lot more complaints and grumbling and social media discussion than normal. There always is, but we were starting to have the conversation with the public that, hey, we have an opportunity to raise that wheel tax or excise and wheel and be able to bring in some additional revenue to put towards roads. There were a couple of attempts earlier, maybe 2010, 2011, to discuss the issue, but they usually ended up getting postponed or tabled. Mm-hmm. There really wasn't any action. And I do remember initially our commissioners were actually not supportive of changing the rate.
Okay.
And I think that's certainly a key part to this, is making sure, obviously, your commissioners are on board with this. I'm sure your highway department would be, but your commissioners as elected leaders who hear a lot about roads and who are dealing with that regularly would be the first group of stakeholders to make sure are on board with this. And at the time, we had a couple of commissioners that weren't. So it kind of was put on pause until we had our discussions in 2014. And roads were getting bad enough. People were really feeling it and incurring vehicle repair costs and other things like that, that there was more of a public desire to do something about that. And this being the easiest route, we eventually had a hearing and updated our rates.
Yeah, and because all of those wheel tax and surtax dollars stay within the county, does that make it easier for adoption to sell to the public?
100%, 100%. And in fact, we stated that multiple times through the process. I think all of it except for a small processing or transaction fee, if I'm not mistaken, yes, is distributed back to the county of origin. So for us, our rate used to be $12.50 for the excise part, and we had increased that to 25. Our wheel tax part for most of the trucks and larger weight vehicles was 20, and we raised that to 25. So not a big difference there, but for passenger type vehicles, we were doubling it essentially. And generally, the revenue projection at the time, with the help of LTAP, was around $350,000 in new money. Now, we're a small county, so 350 may not sound like a lot for some counties, but for us it was, particularly for road materials and the things that you can use that money to purchase on. So, yes, definitely the fact that it's local, and also the fact that it is specifically for road materials and certain expenses. It's not just a general fund increase or something that could go into trucks or go into more staff, that kind of thing.
And now that you can add the state dollars that come along with being eligible for this lane miles distribution, that money will go even further and bring in new state dollars as well. So you mentioned collaboration between the commissioners, the highway department, and the council. I imagine by the time that the council took action to increase the wheel tax, the commissioners were on board and supportive at that time.
Yeah, there was some commissioner changes in over that several year period, but yes, the commissioners were on board by the time we actually had a hearing and started that formal process. Um, so in a way, you could say there was a bit of a warm up in our case of multiple years. You know, it wasn't just something that someone brought up at a meeting and then there was a hearing 2 months later and we did something. It was years in discussion. It was also highlighting what the state was doing. I know that at the time, some of my early social media posts, which I used heavily to share information about the issue, um, I went into depth on kind of a multi-step process. The first is clearly advocating for more road money at the legislative level. You know, in the long run and in the end game, we want to make sure that we're getting higher distributions through the state formulas and getting more money through that method. You know, so we wanted to make sure the public understood that we weren't just deciding, hey, we're going to raise taxes and it's the easy way out. We wanted to show that we were doing other things first, and that was one of those. The second was working specifically with our highway department and the current budget and the commissioners in making sure we were efficiently operating our highway department and spending the money wisely. If we weren't, and the public was perceiving that as not being done well, then it's going to be a tougher sell to say, hey, we need more money. So that was the second part to that. And then we went to the tax part that say, hey, you know, we're working on step one, we're working on step two. Now we're to the point where we can do this for our county and raise that extra money.
And during the consideration of the wheel tax, and even after it was the increase was improved, what was the public response to the adoption?
So we put out a survey actually prior to our hearing where I sent out an email to my constituents. The newspaper had shared it. And so a lot of people responded to that. We asked them a number of questions in that. And I remember getting about 60 responses from individuals. They were about 40 in favor or lean favor. You had about 10 or 12 that were leaning opposed. And then there were a few that were conditional. The one funny one being, well, if my road's on the list, yes, but if someone else's is, no. But generally, through that survey, we were able to see broad support from those that responded to the survey. Now, at the actual hearing itself, we had very low turnout. In fact, I was quite shocked. We had set up more chairs. We had planned for a large crowd. I would say we had barely 10 people actually that showed up at the hearing. And 2 of the people that spoke were in favor of it. So it all seemed to work out from that sentiment, even though from folks that don't show up in the chatter on social media. There obviously are people opposed, but generally of those that took the time to respond and provide input, we saw a favorable lean towards the adjustment.
Very good.
Hmm.
And obviously, you mentioned the revenue impact to the county, but how has your county benefited from the decision in terms of quality of roads throughout your county?
Well, to be honest, not much, because the amount of money, even for a lot of bigger counties, proportionally, I venture to guess that raising your wheel tax, even modestly, is not going to generate an adequate amount of revenue overall to improve condition of roads. Just being honest, we need millions and millions of dollars in new money to really get ahead on our roads in Owen County. And I'm sure most rural counties are in a similar position. So when we're talking about raising 400,000, 500,000, 600 on a wheel tax, yeah, it's better than nothing. But as far as the bigger picture, we need a lot more money to help fund our roads and actually fix them properly.
Certainly.
Yeah.
I assume it has helped in keeping up with the inflation of costs of road building
Yeah,
in
of
recent
course, a
years.
little bit. Yeah, again, better than zero.
Certainly.
And now more than ever, with some of the new legislative requirements, it's very important to have some kind of a wheel tax, even the minimum, just to trigger that qualification for the grant money and the other funding.
The eligibility will be very important going into the future.
Because you kind of don't think of it as $7.50 or whatever. Think of it as twice that, or more, based on leveraging that money and being able to use that to qualify at that point. Yeah.
And this new lane miles fund looks like it will be the growth fund in the amount of money that comes from the state back to county government in terms of road infrastructure funding. So going into the future, this fund will be growing at a time when maybe your LRS and MVH receipts don't, just because of the way the funding formula works. Well, Anton, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Hopefully our county officials will enjoy the LTAP webinar as well. It's very informative. As always, LTAP did a great job with it. Look forward to seeing you all soon for AIC. We are certainly happy to answer any questions related to the wheel tax adoption, the eligibility for the new community crossings lane miles distribution, or any other road funding matter as well. So Anton, thank you for being
Thank
with
you
us
for
today.
having me. Glad to participate.
Look forward to talking with you all again soon.